Story 1: The Deserted Motel Encounter. I was undertaking a road trip across the country to my family's house for Christmas. I knew driving such a long distance during winter was likely not an ideal plan, but I couldn't find anyone to care for my dog, Frankie, so I had to bring him with me. He's just a small dachshund, and I thought he'd be terrified of flying, so I opted to drive. The first half of the trip proceeded smoothly, without any complications, excellent weather, easy driving, and no problems. However, on the morning of the second part of the drive, I woke up to a heavy downfall of snow. I packed up quickly and attempted to outrun the weather, but it only seemed to intensify. Halfway there, I realized it was taking too long, and I wouldn't reach my destination by the end of the night, so I decided to find a motel to stay at instead. The road I was on was quite deserted. There wasn't much of anything besides the occasional gas station every 50 or so miles. So, when I finally saw a sign for a motel, I immediately pulled off and into the parking lot. It was a very old-looking building, and most of the lights were off, but there was another car parked there, so I presumed it had to belong to a worker. I left the car running for Frankie as I got out and walked through the blizzard and up to the main entrance. The door wouldn't open. I wiped the fog off the outside of the window and pressed my face closer, attempting to peer through and see if anyone was inside, but it appeared dark and abandoned. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I didn't have much time before I heard Frankie barking. I looked back, seeing two men walking past my car and approaching me. The way they walked made it evident that something was amiss. I tried to start walking back to my car and ignore them, but they intercepted me. "Hey, was this place open?" one asked. No, I think it's closed tonight, sorry," I replied, trying to walk around them. "Do you think you could help us? We're having some car troubles." "Maybe you could spare some gas," they pressed, sounding as if they were scrambling for any excuse to continue engaging with me. I said no, then backed up and made a wide detour around them, but even then, they still tried to get in front of me. I hurried back into my car as their footsteps crunched quickly behind me. By the time I got in and locked the doors, they were already at my window. Frankie was whining, and I couldn't blame him. This was truly uncomfortable and somewhat frightening, given our isolation on a deserted road. One of them repeatedly knocked on my window, still asking for help, but it was abundantly clear that he didn't need any and this was merely some kind of trap or deception. Before anything could escalate, I backed up and drove out onto the main road. After giving it some thought, I ended up dialing 911 to report their strange behavior. I received a call back from an officer 20 minutes later, stating they were no longer at the parking lot, nor was their car. If that doesn't definitively indicate guilt, I don't know what does. Their car clearly worked well enough for them to leave, and they apparently departed right after I did. More so than my brief interaction with the men, it's the unsettling thought of what they were potentially attempting to do that horrifies me. If anything had happened out there, I probably never would have been found. Story 2: The Trucker's Deception. I was employed at a gas station for 2 years, beginning in 2015. During the winter of my first year, a regular customer frequently came in. I worked night shifts, so whenever anyone visited more than once, I usually recognized them. This individual was a trucker who introduced himself as Paul. He was a genuinely pleasant man, though he definitely possessed a distinctive quality. He was perpetually smiling, perhaps excessively so, and happy, especially for the middle of the night. Sometimes, I actually found it somewhat unsettling. One particular night, he entered and was behaving differently. He walked in and greeted me, but as he surveyed the aisles, his face appeared dull and almost angry. He selected an energy drink and approached the counter, where his face abruptly reverted to that overly cheerful expression. I could, however, discern dread in his eyes, making his smile seem even more forced and, in a way, disturbing. He paid and walked out to his truck, then drove away. I had almost forgotten about it until the following day when I saw his truck pull in again. It was quite cold and snowy outside when Paul entered. He bore that same unsettling look as yesterday, except this time, he didn't smile at all. He grabbed the first drink on the shelf and came up to the counter. As he paid, he began asking me questions, such as how busy it was that night and when my shift would end. Then, before he left, he inquired if I would mind helping him lift something in his truck. Having known him for such a long time now, I agreed, wanting to be helpful, and put on my jacket, following him outside. The gas station was deserted, save for his truck parked on the far side of the lot. I followed him there, and he opened the passenger door, then walked around to the driver's side and got in. He stated it was right up here, gesturing for me to get in as well. I climbed up and sat down. It was one of those large box trucks that featured a door behind the seats for access to the cargo section. I looked at Paul. He displayed that strange, wide smile again. "It's just right in there." "I'll follow behind you," he said, pointing at the door. I suddenly felt profoundly unsettled and could sense that this was not what he claimed it was. I sat there, trying to formulate what to say or do, and then I began to detect an odor. It was strong and disgusting, emanating from whatever was behind that door. I looked back up at Paul. His face was tense, but he maintained that smile and simply watched me, waiting for me to move. I leapt back out of the truck, slamming the door behind me, and hurried back into the station. He did not follow. As I was rushing back, though, I thought I heard him yell, like a frustrated yell, coming from the truck. The wind obscured most of the sound. He pulled out of the gas station soon after. I worked there for another year, and Paul never reappeared, not even once. I don't know what was in the back of that truck or what was truly going on with Paul, but I believe I was fortunate not to have to discover the truth. Story 3: the silent intruder. It was just before Christmas, school was out, but my parents still worked during the day. As an only child, this meant I had the entire house to myself and could do as I pleased all day while they were gone. This was just another weekday, a Tuesday I believe, and my parents left for work at 9 a.m. I immediately powered on my PC in my bedroom and started gaming. Strangely, only 15 or 20 minutes after my parents had left, there was a knock at the front door. Being young and unaccustomed to answering the door alone, I chose to ignore it. I tried not to make too much noise for the next little while, hoping they would think no one was home and just leave. I heard no more knocks, so I continued with my day. I played video games for an excessive amount of time, honestly, like 3 or 4 hours straight, before I even got up from my desk to prepare some breakfast. I went downstairs and poured myself a bowl of cereal, then started walking back to bring it upstairs when I noticed the front door was unlocked. I found that peculiar because my parents always remembered to lock it and typically would leave through the garage anyway. I went over and slid the lock down, then returned to my room. I think it was around 1 or 2 p.m. After finishing eating, I immediately resumed gaming. I had just reopened my game and loaded into a new match, so only about 3 minutes later, when I felt something shake my desk. I didn't hear anything, but I had my headset on, so it was unlikely I would have unless it was genuinely loud. It felt like a vibration, though, which I would usually only feel from my parents closing a door or something. I removed my headset and looked at the bedroom door, listening for what could have caused it. It was quiet. I got up and opened the door, then looked down the hallway toward the stairs, again listening for anything and again hearing nothing. I was considering that it could have been the heater turning on, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from the door being unlocked earlier. I walked over to the stairs, and just as I reached the top and looked down, I saw a shadow move near the bottom. I froze, and just a second later, the shadow also stopped moving, as if they had somehow seen me. My heart was pounding. I felt like I stood motionless for an entire minute before the shadow moved again. I could faintly hear footsteps walking toward the back of the house, and then the back door quietly opening and closing, followed by silence. I ran to my parents' bedroom and called 911 with the home phone. Police arrived a few minutes later. This only seemed to grow more disturbing and strange, however. There were no signs of the intruder breaking in unless he had picked the lock on the front door. However, it was still locked when the police arrived, which implies he likely got inside sometime during the 3 to 4 hours I was gaming. I also reflect on the knocks I heard right after my parents had left, but I just can't comprehend what they were doing inside for that long. He was almost certainly in the house when I went downstairs and made myself a bowl of cereal, perhaps even watching me from another room, hiding somewhere. We do not know what his intentions were, but I have never truly felt safe again since that day. Story 4: The Open Door in the Blizzard. I was spending the night indoors. It was intensely cold outside, with a heavy snowstorm bearing down on our town. I had my comfort show playing on the television and was half asleep on the couch when I heard footsteps approaching outside my front door. Their boots were loud enough to capture my attention and awaken me. I looked at the door, but they didn't knock. They stood there for a few seconds, then their boots took a couple more steps before silence suddenly fell. It sounded as though they had stepped off the porch and into the snow, where I could no longer hear them. Confused, I got up and looked out the window. The snowstorm was worse than I had anticipated. It was almost entirely white outside, making it difficult to see more than a few feet beyond the window. Barely, I could discern shoe prints in the snow coming off the porch. Why did they simply step off the porch like that, and what were they even doing outside right now with such severe weather? I couldn't really find any more answers. I checked the side and back windows for any more shoe prints, in case they had walked around my house, but I didn't see much of anything. I returned to the couch and laid down. I felt it was odd, but I didn't want to overreact. An hour or so passed, and nothing else occurred. The soft rumble of the snowstorm outside and the low volume of the television made my eyes heavy, gradually lulling me to sleep. When my eyes eventually opened, it was still very dark. The TV was on its timeout screen, indicating it was 3 a.m. The snowstorm was still raging fiercely, but strangely, it was much louder. As I continued to awaken, I began to realize it was extremely loud, as if the sound was clear and crisp, not muffled by the windows. My eyes darted fully open, and I got up. I turned on the light next to me, noticing water spots all over the room, leading directly to the front door, which was wide open. Snow was pouring into the house, and boot prints were outlined in the water, extending through the hallway. I could vaguely make out the same boot prints leaving the house, but I wasn't certain. I retrieved my phone and locked myself in the bathroom as I called for help. It turned out whoever had broken in had already departed. It seemed they had entered and searched for something specific, and after failing to find it, they simply walked back out into the blizzard. While they were inside my home, they either somehow didn't notice me on the couch or crept past me quietly, searching my house without waking me. Even the mere thought of it thoroughly unnerves me. I haven't had a restful night's sleep since that incident, constantly waking up in the middle of the night, startled by every minor creak. Story 5: The Hidden House Guest. It was the first weekend of February, and I was at home, enjoying my days off from work. Everything was quite routine, but sometime in the middle of the day on Saturday, I thought I detected a sound from upstairs. It was a thud, just a single one, and not alarmingly loud or anything. I had never heard it before, which was the sole reason I went up to investigate its source. I found nothing, however. I wasn't concerned and barely thought about it for the rest of the day. Hours later, as I was settling down for the night, sitting on the couch and barely keeping my eyes open, there was another thud, almost identical to the previous one. Again, I looked around and saw nothing. I even opened the door to the spare bedroom, which was completely empty, and looked around, still seeing nothing. Perhaps it was an animal on the roof, or simply the house making strange noises. I went to bed not long after. The next day, I woke up and went downstairs as usual to prepare coffee and breakfast. As I did so, something felt amiss. As I moved around the kitchen and made breakfast, things seemed to have been rearranged. The cereal and chips I kept in the pantry just didn't look like they were where I had left them. Of course, I hadn't intentionally tried to memorize their exact arrangement, so I couldn't confirm it. I just had that peculiar feeling that it wasn't right, which I couldn't fathom how it could be possible. I tried to pay more attention to things for the remainder of that morning, but eventually, I forgot about it. I think I was preoccupied with how impossible it would have been, so I must have been mistaken. The rest of that day, I was downstairs, watching television and performing some chores. It was just after sunset when I heard that same thud again. I stood up to check on it, just as I had every time before, but as I approached the stairs, I heard a click. It was very quiet, but it was definitively a click of some sort. I ascended to the top of the steps and listened for a moment, then surveyed my bedroom, finding nothing. Then I proceeded to the spare bedroom, thinking I might as well check again. I grasped the handle and turned it, but it stopped halfway. It was locked from the other side. Blood drained from my face, and my heart seized with sudden panic. I took a few shaky steps away from the door, feeling as though my legs were giving out, but I composed myself when I heard movement behind the door, approaching the other side. I began to run back down the stairs as I heard another click, followed by the door creaking open. I burst out the front door and ran to the end of the street, where I called 911. When the police searched the home, they found no one, but in the spare bedroom closet, there were grocery bags and a blanket. Someone had been attempting to live in there, at least for those 2 days, but probably even longer without my knowledge. It was likely they were emerging at night while I was sleeping to go downstairs, eat, drink, and do whatever they pleased. It sends chills through me just contemplating it. Thankfully, they seem to have departed for good after that night. What they would have done had I discovered them is something I never even wished to know. Story 6: The Fake Rideshare App Driver. It was New Year's Eve. I've never been much of a party person, but on major nights like these, I almost invariably found myself peer pressured into going out. This year, my friend was hosting a party at his residence. He was somewhat known as the rich friend due to his large house and expansive property. My buddy Trav picked me up around 9 p.m., and we drove to the party. There were perhaps 20 or 30 people there, nothing excessively wild, but enough to lead me to consume more alcohol than I probably should have. We engaged in some drinking games and watched the ball drop, overall, it was a good time. Around 3 a.m., however, I was ready to depart, but I discovered Trav passed out on a bed upstairs. Realizing he, and likely no one else there, was sober enough to drive, I went outside and ordered a ride-share app. The app indicated the driver was 10 minutes away, so I sat down on the curb at the end of the driveway and waited. His house wasn't near any major roads. It was somewhat isolated, quiet and pleasant, which was ideal for relaxing after such a night. I simply sat there, huddled beneath my jacket, and awaited my ride for what felt like only 4 or 5 minutes when a car pulled up. "Ride-share app?" the man called out. I quickly got up and entered, somewhat startled by how I had lost track of time. I guess I truly was intoxicated. I settled into the back seat, and he began driving. The man appeared to be in his 50s, with short dark hair and a thick beard. "Big party tonight?" he inquired. "Oh yeah, I guess so," I responded, though I wasn't particularly in the mood for small talk. He glanced at me in the mirror, and something about his gaze made me uncomfortable. At the time, I truly didn't know why, thinking I was just overthinking it. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, attempting to rest for the remainder of the journey, but only a minute later, my phone chimed. I immediately opened my eyes, making direct eye contact with the driver in the mirror. He was already looking at me. I awkwardly looked away and pulled out my phone. My stomach tightened, and my face went pale. It was a message from the ride-share app application, a text stating that the driver had just arrived at the pickup location, followed by another text from the driver asking where I was. I looked back up at the mirror. The man's eyes were fixed on mine. I put my phone back in my pocket, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes again. Inside, I was panicking and terrified, but I tried to act as if I knew nothing. 30 seconds later, I felt the car decelerating, and when I peered out the window, I saw we were at an intersection with a red light. As soon as the car stopped, I opened the door and leapt out. Midway through my exit, he started driving, which caused me to fall onto the pavement, but I quickly got up and sprinted away. He drove off after that. I don't know who that man was, but it seemed he was driving around on New Year's night, picking up random intoxicated individuals who were waiting for ride-share apps. There were so many warning signs I had overlooked, like the fact that we weren't even heading in the direction of my home. I was simply too impaired to think clearly. Honestly, I should never have gotten into the car without checking my phone first. Where he would have taken me, and what would have happened, remains unknown. Story 7: The Stalker in the Store. It was the day after Christmas, and I was working as an overnight stalker at a small, family-owned grocery store. I wasn't even sure why I had been scheduled for this night, as we had been closed for Christmas, and business was likely very slow during the day, meaning there wasn't much stocking work for me to do. I spent the first hour filling the minimal items that needed to be stocked on the shelves. Afterward, I simply wandered around. As I walked past the front of the store, I noticed a person outside, uncomfortably close to the building for that time of night. It appeared as though he was just walking around, but he quickly noticed me looking at him. Instead of moving away, he approached the window. He didn't speak or attempt to knock, he simply stared directly at me. I felt incredibly uneasy and was unsure how to react. After a few seconds of him not averting his gaze, I turned and walked away from the window. I suppose I was trying to act as if I wasn't bothered. However, it was undeniably strange. No normal person behaves like that. I waited a few minutes before returning to the front of the store and looking out the window. He was gone. I sighed in relief, then continued to walk around the store to pass the time, weaving in and out of the aisles, tidying up some of the shelves. Perhaps 10 minutes later, as I rounded the corner at the end of one of the aisles, I immediately halted. Several boxes had fallen off the shelf and were scattered on the floor. These were not small items that could have simply tipped over, they had to have been deliberately knocked down or moved by someone. Just as I was attempting to comprehend this, I heard something from further down the aisle, a soft but deep and eerie laugh, like a man quietly giggling right around the end of the aisle. It almost sounded unnatural, like a grown adult giggling like a child. A part of me considered confronting him, but then I recalled the man I had seen by the window. He appeared quite large and could have had something concealed in his jacket. I bolted to the front and out the doors, got into my car, and called the police. They arrived 10 minutes later, and the man inside the store was gone. We later obtained the security tapes and observed him finding a way in through a side door. As he hid behind the aisle, laughing at me, he was holding a knife in his hand, a small switchblade of some kind. The police believe he was intoxicated, and I don't disagree, but I also don't think it changes anything. I could have died that night if circumstances had unfolded differently. Story 8: The Eerie Forest Scream. Annually, around the conclusion of February, my good friend Justin and I undertake a camping excursion to the identical location. Both of us have extensive experience with backpacking and camping, but there was always a distinct and appealing quality about camping within a snowy forest. With the appropriate gear, it wasn't particularly hazardous either. This year, we arrived, erected our tents, built a roaring campfire, and enjoyed a few beverages around the flickering flames. It wasn't long after we had settled in that we were abruptly confronted by a horrifying sound. It was a deep, dark scream in the distance, reverberating across the landscape, lasting only a few seconds before silence descended once more. Both of us sprang from our chairs, unnerved by the sound. It seemed too far away for us to even hope of discerning its source, yet we instinctively looked in that direction anyway. Justin speculated it had to be an animal producing an uncannily human-like sound, believing it impossible for anyone else to be out there. I, conversely, was quite certain it was a person. Regardless, we were uncertain how to proceed, other than to wait and see if we heard it again. A significant period elapsed with no further occurrences. The sun began its descent, and the temperature steadily dropped. We collected more wood for the fire and prepared food. Then, once more, out of nowhere, that scream pierced the air. This time, it was closer, perhaps only 200 feet from our campsite. Justin and I exchanged glances, both of us believing we should investigate before the sun completely set. I retrieved my knife, just in case, and we both bundled up before heading into the woods. We tried to move with caution, uncertain of precisely what we were approaching. We had advanced perhaps 150 feet when we heard it one last time, almost directly beside us. I froze, staring in that direction, but there was nothing visible. I glanced at Justin, and he appeared to be as perturbed as I was. We must have remained motionless, waiting for nearly 5 minutes, before Justin cautiously began to step forward again. He passed a few trees when he abruptly halted, and I could discern the fear emanating from his body language. I moved to stand next to him, and I nearly vomited. There, lying in the snow, was a deer carcass, unmistakably a recent kill. Then, I felt Justin's hand tap my shoulder. I lifted my gaze, and standing across the forest, there was a person. They were simply standing there, wearing minimal winter attire, and they were observing us, almost as if studying us. Justin tapped my shoulder more forcefully, and I understood his unspoken message. Both of us promptly left, rushing back to our camp. We said nothing as we hastily packed our belongings and vacated the area. I do not believe there is any rational explanation for what we witnessed or who that individual was out there, or even if it was the person we heard screaming. Following that incident, we ceased visiting our customary camping spot and opted for a different area, fervently hoping never to encounter something similar again. Story 9: The Unsettling Delivery. It was the day before Christmas Eve, and I had started my car to make a few dash deliveries. I was hoping the holiday season would bring in more generous tips. Around 11 p.m., I received an order. It was a standard delivery, a bag of food to drop off at a house. Most of my previous orders had actually been grocery deliveries, likely because stores would be closing for the upcoming days. However, the address for this particular order was distant, much farther than I typically would be willing to drive. But with a scarcity of other orders coming through, I accepted it nonetheless. It was lightly snowing outside, and the roads were exceptionally quiet, rendering the drive peaceful. The house was not situated in an average neighborhood. When I pulled up to what I presumed would be the entrance to a residential area, it was, in fact, merely a narrow path winding through trees, culminating in a small, cabin-like home. I drove down the path and parked, then exited the vehicle with the food. I approached the door and knocked several times. From within, I could discern chatter, like a group of people laughing and talking over one another. The sheer number of voices confused me, making me wonder how so many people could fit into such a confined cabin. There was also an unsettling quality about the sound. Something felt undeniably off. Then, the door opened. A man stood before me, and the stark contrast to my expectations momentarily disoriented me. The interior of the house was entirely motionless. No one was moving around, and most of the lights were even off. Yet, the sound of a large holiday party continued to emanate from a small room at the end of the hallway. The man smiled at me, saying, "Why don't you come bring the food inside? They'll be happy to see you." This was an odd remark. I began to stammer, attempting to decline and fabricate an excuse, but the man interrupted. "They just want to thank you for working during the holidays. You'll be glad you stopped by," he insisted. All the while he uttered these strange and frankly unsettling statements, the chatter from the back of the cabin persisted until it abruptly ceased. Just like that, the cabin fell silent. It was as if a recording or tape had suddenly stopped playing. The man glanced back for a moment, clearly caught off guard by the silence. Before he could react, I dropped the bag on the porch and sprinted back to my car. I got in and drove away. I discontinued deliveries for the night and remained at home for the rest of the holidays. I know that nothing physically happened at that cabin, but the disturbingly strange nature of everything, and the thoughts of what could have happened, still profoundly unsettle me. Story 10: The Cabin Footprints. I found myself at a family-owned lodge in Canada, a modest cabin that my grandparents had constructed and maintained over the years, making it a regular retreat for family members. My stay was planned for 3 nights, commencing just after the New Year. This particular cabin was situated in a remote, off-the-grid location, accessible only by snowmobile, which was standard practice during that time of year. Upon arrival, I promptly ignited the wood heater and organized my belongings within the bedroom. Within merely half an hour, I began to experience the profound sense of calm I had been longing for. Time seemed to decelerate in this isolated setting, and my mind was unburdened by worries, allowing me to simply recline and savor the tranquility and silence. The remainder of that day and night was truly pleasant. The following morning, I arose at sunrise and prepared breakfast atop the wood stove. After bundling up, I ventured outside to retrieve more wood. The moment I opened the front door, I was startled to discover footprints in the fresh snow leading directly up to the cabin. I immediately stepped out and surveyed the surroundings. Following the tracks for a considerable distance, they led deep into the woods, exhibiting no indication of heading towards the road, which was several miles distant. Confusion washed over me. How could someone be so far out here without a snowmobile, and why were they there at all? Their presence implied they had approached the cabin in the dead of night, otherwise, I would surely have heard them that morning. I proceeded to gather wood from the shed and brought it inside. I contemplated departing, yet I reasoned that if they had merely passed by without any malicious action, it might have been an inadvertent intrusion. Furthermore, the sheer difficulty of reaching and leaving the cabin meant that an early departure would render the entire trip a substantial waste. I settled by the fire, maintaining a vigilant watch for the next couple of hours, but observed nothing unusual. As the sun ascended higher and the temperature gradually warmed, I put my jacket back on, feeling inclined to take a walk in the woods to occupy my time. I decided I might as well seize the chance to investigate where the footprints might lead, perhaps discovering another cabin or some other sign of civilization that would alleviate my apprehension. I tracked the prints into the forest, walking for what felt like approximately 20 minutes, encountering no signs of anything else. It was an unbroken trail of prints in the snow, winding through the trees, until I suddenly detected a sound ahead of me. I abruptly lifted my head and peered forward. The surroundings instantly became silent, and everything was still, just an endless expanse of trees and snow. I was certain that what I had heard was the crunch of a footstep. There was no mistaking it. Goosebumps spread across my body as the realization hit me. Someone was out there, directly in front of me, likely concealed behind one of the trees. They had probably just become aware of my presence and quickly hidden, perhaps only 10 or 15 feet away. "Hello, is someone out there?" I called out. There was no reply, not even the faintest sound. As the tension escalated, I felt compelled to act. I decided to pivot and sprint back towards the cabin. I hastily gathered all my belongings, secured the cabin, and took the snowmobile back to the road. I remain unsure of what transpired at that cabin or what might have unfolded, but I am absolutely convinced that the individual in the woods was the same person who had approached in the middle of the night. Their path back towards my cabin only confirmed that their presence was no mere accident. I have not returned to the cabin since that unsettling experience.